2017, the year when so many things we thought we knew changed irrevocably. The halcyon era of hope under Barack Obama gave way to the misery and despotism of Donald Trump. The Me Too movement revealed many of our so-called elite institutions were rife with corruption and coercion on levels not thought imaginable. And Russia's destabilizing interference on social media was in its early stages of attempting to cleave the United States apart. Amid this chaos and wreckage, a group of teenagers and early 20-somethings from disparate parts of the United States began forming a new music scene exclusively online. They were hip-hop artists, rockers, punks, and goths. But the thing that all united them was the camaraderie found online, specifically on a ragtag music hosting service called SoundCloud. On this platform, they redefined the limits of hip-hop and emo, transformed the 808 kick into a modern-day electric guitar, and expanded the emotional range of modern pop music in ways unseen since the 90s. Unfortunately, though many of the pioneers arrived in a burst of dynamic musical lightning, many of their careers, in fact, ended in tragedy of unimaginable proportions. This is the story of SoundCloud Rap. Before we chart SoundCloud Rap's rise, we need to look in detail at the circumstances that led to its popularity, both culturally/sociologically and musically. A good place to start would be to look at hip-hop's course in the early to mid-2010s, before the arrival of cloud rap, and to note the contrasts. The early 2010s started off, despite the financial crisis of 2008, as a highly positive time. America had just elected its first black president, the wars of the previous decade appeared to be winding down, and maybe, just maybe, we would in fact fulfill the promises of hope and change and move towards a brighter future. And clearly, this sentiment of positivity was reflected in songs such as Jay-Z and Alicia Keys' Empire State of Mind, Kanye's All of the Lights, and the Black Eyed Peas' I Got a Feeling, to name a few. But while these songs reflected a certain sentiment that was popular in the more elite circles of the country, it was not a universal sentiment. In the early 2010s, there was another story at play. Neoliberal policies had utterly failed multiple communities throughout the United States, and the wider world in general. From Broward County, Florida, home of a young José Onfray, to Long Island, New York, home of a young Gustave Herbe, there was a creeping sense that unbridled capitalism was not, in fact, helping, and in fact, was actually curtailing hopes for a better life for many young people. This led to a somewhat universal sense among late millennials and Gen Zers of an unyielding depression, anxiety, and apathy that was not being reflected in the mainstream music of the day. One thing that differentiated this generation from previous ones was the increasing hyperconnectivity made possible by the influx of social media. Through Instagram, Snapchat, etc., this generation was more able than previous ones to connect with one another in deep, meaningful ways. And it was this preeminence of social media that was the catalyst for the ascension of cloud rap. Entire cliques and posses were, for the first time in modern hip-hop history, formed almost entirely online, with members hailing from wildly different parts of the country. The impact of this cannot be understated. It proved for the first time in music history that one did not need a physical scene or venue, think CBGB's in New York or the Fillmore in San Francisco, to make a musical movement happen. To this day, many people argue about who was the first, quote, SoundCloud rapper. And while I am sure for musicologists and music historians this will remain an open question with a shifting answer for years to come, I feel quite confident in saying cloud rap truly begins with two people, Future and Young Lean. While there were a ton of artists from the early 2010s who very much fell into the category of cloud rap forefathers, it is these two, in my estimation, who ended up having the most profound development on the later artists who would bring the style to its popular zenith in the late 2010s. In the case of Future, it is undeniable that his approach to rapping, coupled with Atlanta trap-style production, was something that was wholly new in the early 2010s. In fact, the term mumble rap simply didn't exist before Future appeared on the hip-hop scene. These characteristics that he pioneered provided one lane in SoundCloud rap that became popular, with artists such as Lil Yachty exploiting the style in their music. In Young Lean's case, his heavy focus on what I would call internetization, pseudo-vaporwave aesthetics, lyrics, and lyrics focusing on being, well, a sad boy, truly broke open new areas of emotional exploration in hip-hop that had been hinted at with 808s and Heartbreak and Take Care, but were taken to new heights with the release of Ginseng Strip 2002 in 2013. While later collectives like Gothboi Clique had, in many ways, a much edgier sound and aesthetic, their indebtedness to Young Lean's barnstorming internet ways are undeniable. And it was the success of these two seminal artists, along with a few key other players, that set the stage for the rise of cloud rap. Now, the influence of these forefathers, coupled with the increasing omniscience of social media, led to 2015 being the year things really started to pick up steam in the online sphere. Gustav Ayer, known to all of us as Lil Peep, began releasing a quick succession of singles and EPs on SoundCloud that gained traction and notice due to the groundbreaking way he was able to combine trap-style production with Midwest emo guitar riffs, as well as nu metal influences. Additionally, the incorporation of cultural touchstones such as the Hellboy movies and anime ended up being a vital component of the dark, emotionally drained aesthetic that would become characteristic of cloud rap. At the same time, a young Jose Onfray, or Xxxtentacion as we all know him today, was seeing his releases, also hosted on SoundCloud, pick up steam organically enough that he was able to quit his job at a call center in Florida and pursue music full-time. And it wasn't just these two. Throughout the country, kids from all different backgrounds were uploading unique, yet aesthetically aligned music that featured a dark, angry, hedonistic message with nu metal, trap, and emo serving as the musical bedrock of said music, and finding wild success almost exclusively in niche online communities on the internet. Throughout the insanity that was 2016, cloud rap was there to soundtrack it all, and it showed hip-hop was undergoing tectonic shifts musically, even if the mainstream didn't know it yet. While Drake released One Dance, and the Life of Pablo listening party happened at Madison Square Garden, Lil Peep was busy joining his first collective, Schema Posse, Trippie Red and Juice Wrld were just debuting their first mixtapes, and in January of that year, Xxxtentacion independently released a little song called Look at Me, which you might have heard. All of this tumultuous sonic energy continued to bubble ever more hot throughout the year, with a series of indie tours, YouTube interviews, and Instagram beefs among various crews that did more and more to raise the profile of these disparate, vagabond young men, and helped usher in a changing sound of hip-hop in the late 2010s. However, once the ball dropped and the calendar clicked forward to January 1st, 2017, all bets were truly off. This was the year SoundCloud Rap truly became, quote, SoundCloud Rap. The previously released Look at Me by Xxxtentacion went mainstream, hitting the top 40 of the Billboard chart, and prompting a Drake feud that led to more conspiracy theories and an Alex Jones Christmas party, but I digress. Lil Peep had signed with major management and production companies and released Come Over When You're Sober Part 1, which of course our favorite music critic, Fantano, famously loved.
Ugh.
And even also-rans such as Lil Pump managed to release the massive hit Gucci Gang, which had hard-partying dumbass lyrics only comparable to Poison at their zenith of MTV debauchery. Really, it was a kaleidoscopic year for cloud rap. Hell, even Young Lean, who at this point was considered a senior figure of the genre, released Stranger, which honestly has one of my favorite cloud rap tracks of all time on there, Red Bottom Sky. The diverse nature of the music that was released in 2017 really goes back to what the ethos of the generation that was making cloud rap was all about. These kids were black, white, Latino, Asian, and had grown up in a truly multicultural America. White kids had grown up with Kanye and Drake as much as black kids had grown up with My Chemical Romance or 3 Days Grace. And for the first time, honestly since the late 60s, this true desegregation and breaking down of racial barriers in music was encouraged and celebrated. And the one element tying all these disparate influences together was the use of blown-out melodic 808 kicks to anchor most songs. While this is not the first time 808 kicks were used to create melodic bass lines, that honor goes to the legendary 808s and Heartbreak, it was, in my opinion, the moment when the 808 kick drum became the equivalent of the electric guitar in the 1970s. The seamless nature of programming 808 kicks along a MIDI timeline made it the easiest way to make a wall of obnoxious sound in a way that was sure to frighten all the Gen X and Boomer parents out there ranting about the greatness of Tom Petty and Bruce Springsteen. Though it's only been 5 years, I cannot understate how it seemed in 2017 that this was the future of hip-hop. the grunge revolution of the Xennial generation. However, like grunge before it, sadly, it was not hard to see that trouble was on the horizon for many of the brightest stars of this upcoming genre. As 2017 rolled on, Lil Peep would take to his Instagram stories complaining of deep depression and anxiety while looking more and more intoxicated at various times during performances. Xxxtentacion, despite speaking of how he wanted to increase the well of empathy within him and help kids dealing with similar dark thoughts and demons, still sadly could not disentangle himself with his own dark habits, often finding himself on the wrong side of the law. And while Wrld seemed to be the most happy-go-lucky of the upstarts, even he had shown moments of vulnerability in regards to drugs and alcohol that had proved to be frighteningly foreboding. And sadly, by the end of 2019, all the aforementioned brightest stars of the genre were gone. Lil Peep succumbed to a drug overdose in the waning days of 2017, Xxxtentacion was mercilessly gunned down in 2018, and Wrld also succumbed to a drug overdose in 2019. And I can't help but think, even at this late date in 2022, that this was a movement cut short. And as I sit back and think about this movement as a whole, and the dramatic cascading series of deaths towards the end of the last decade, there is a galling parallel I cannot help but see clearly in my mind's eye. The late 70s punk scene in Britain and America. Both movements reached their zenith in the last 3 years of their respective decades, and then flamed out with a series of catastrophic deaths at the start of the following decade, 1980 and 2020 in this case. And I've often pondered, why were these scenes so similar, and why did they come about when they did? It turns out both had similar musical and socio-cultural elements working in their favor on the ground. Like the 1970s, the music of the mid-2010s had gotten a little bit excessive in terms of self-indulgence. Now, there is no way anyone could convince me not to love Life of Pablo or To Pimp a Butterfly, but if I zoom out from a distance, with their avant-garde production, long instrumental passages, and esoteric lyrics, I could see how it might be the equivalent of, say, a 70s prog rock album in terms of delivery and aesthetics. And if you're a punk rocker in 1976, or a SoundCloud rapper in 2016, all you want is a direct, visceral music that speaks to the experiences you are going through, not self-indulgent opera-length albums about abstract concepts. Additionally, the cultural conditions of England in the 1970s and America in the 2010s are eerily similar. The hope of the early part of the decade had turned to ash by the middle, with a declining, stagnating economy, a despotic leader, and an influx of cheap drugs lined with dangerous substances such as fentanyl. It's not hard to see why both eras ended up producing a dark, jagged style of music. And finally, just as punk was absorbed into the commercial form of new wave music as the 70s became the 80s, so too was SoundCloud rap incorporated into a darker, yet more commercial form of bedroom pop pioneered by artists such as Billie Eilish. So what is to be said about the SoundCloud rap era, now that it is firmly in our rear view? As I said in the title of this video, despite its rapid rise and exciting new contributions to music, ultimately it was rigged to burn. The same lifestyles that gave birth to a music with such edge and vivid sounds ultimately was the same lifestyle that did some of its greatest stars in. It was also a mirror to our current society in many ways. It showed some of the new challenges young people go through in an era of continually shrinking economic opportunities and increasing anxiety in a neoliberal, globalized world. Add in the added pressures of social media clout, and you have a dangerous cocktail of stresses, as we found out. But despite all of this, I am certain SoundCloud rap's legacy will continue to reverberate through the decades, much the same way 70s punk rock did earlier. And artists like Lil Peep and Xxxtentacion will remain legends, much the same way Johnny Rotten or Kurt Cobain are regarded today. Cloud rap may have indeed been rigged to burn, but it was not rigged to burn down.